All right, welcome to lesson 4 on coordinate planes. So as we're talking about coordinate planes, really what we're talking about is a two-dimensional graph that includes 4 different sections, or what we're going to refer to as quadrants. All right, and on these graphs, we're going to plot something called ordered pairs, which are just points that are located throughout the 4 quadrants of the graph. All right, so these points are located in reference to the x-axis and the y-axis. The x and the y-axis separate the coordinate plane into 4 regions called quadrants. The origin is located at the point 0, 0, which is where the 2 axes intersect or meet. Ordered pairs are always named x, y, with the x being first and the y being second. You also want to make sure that ordered pairs have parentheses around them. The x-coordinate tells you how far to go to the right, which is towards the positive numbers, or the left, which is negative numbers. The y-coordinate tells you how far to go up, which are positive numbers, and down, which are negative numbers. So if we look here at this coordinate plane, what we want to do is be able to label the x-axis, the y-axis, the origin, and the quadrants. So with our x-axis, that is going to be our horizontal axis, okay? I like to remember the horizontal axis is x because x is kind of, at letter-wise, it's short and fat. Okay, or short and wide. Y is longer and lengthier, so the y-axis is going to be our vertical axis. So you're just going to put a little x and y next to each one of those axes. The next thing we want to do is label our origin. Now, if you remember, the origin is located at the point 0, 0. So what we're going to do is find 0 on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis, which is right here in the middle of our coordinate plane. And we'll just label that the origin. The last thing we want to do is label our quadrants. Now, remember that the quadrants are going to be the 4 sections that our graph is split up into. The most common quadrant that you've probably seen in math classes before is this first quadrant. So Q1, and we're going to use Roman numerals. So 1 in Roman numerals, you just write with the letter I. The quadrant just to the left of that is Q2. Again, we're going to use Roman numerals, so you can put Q and then 2 I's next to it. The quadrant below that is going to be quadrant 3. So you can use Roman numerals by putting a Q and then 3 I's next to it, 3 uppercase I's. And then the last quadrant is going to be our quadrant 4. And we can label that by writing Q and then I and then V. Okay, this stands for Q4. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice graphing each one of these points on this next coordinate grid. Now, again, we want to remember that with our ordered pairs, they all come in the format of x, y. So the first number is always going to represent the number along our x-axis, and the second number is going to represent the number along our y-axis. So if we want to graph point A on the ordered pair 3, 4, we're going to find 3 along the x-axis, and I'm going to label my axes. We're going to find 3 along the x-axis right here. And then we're going to go up to 4 on our y-axis, and we're going to find where that point would meet. Oops. We can put a plot right there and label it point A. Next, we can do point B at -4, -2. So -4 is our x, so we're going to find that along the horizontal line, -4. And then -2 is our y, so we're going to find -2 along our y, find where those meet, and put a point right there and label it point B. Point C is at -1, 3, so we're going to find -1 along the x-axis. We're going to find 3 along the y-axis, and then we're going to find where those two grid lines would meet. And that is going to be right here. We'll label it point C. Point D is 2, -2, so we'll find 2 along the x-axis, -2 on the y-axis, find where they meet and plot a point. Label it point D. Point E is at 0, 3, so what we want to do is find 0 on the x-axis. That's going to be right here at our origin. And then we're going to find 3 on our y-axis, find where our fingers would meet, and that's going to end up being right here on the y-axis. Label it point E. And our last point is going to be -4, 0, so we're going to find -4 on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis, and then put a point right where those two grid lines would meet. So your final graph should look like this. What I want to encourage you to do right now is to go ahead and try this next practice page on your own, and then come back to the video and check your answers. I am going to go through it very, very quickly. And if you have any questions, you can see your teacher. So the first section asks you to, so if you want to pause the video and try this on your own, go ahead and do that, and then come back and check your answers. So it says write the coordinate of each point. So we're going to look at point A. Well, the first thing we want to do is figure out where A falls on the x-axis. So I'm going to put my finger at point A, and I'm going to move it down to the x-axis, and I see that that's right at 3. Then I want to go back to point A, and I want to move my finger all the way over to the y-axis, and I find that that's at the number 2. So point A is at 3, 2, and the last thing I want to remember is my parentheses around that, around those numbers. Point B, again, I'm going to find point B on my coordinate plane. I'm going to put my finger on point B and then move my finger down to the x-axis. That looks like it's right about 7. Then I'm going to find point B again and move my finger over to the y-axis. That's about 9. So point B is at 7, 9. Just a reminder, don't forget your parentheses around that ordered pair. Point C is going to be our next one. Now, point C I see is right here. It's along the x-axis. So I just need to figure out where it falls on that x-axis. And again, it's between 6 and 8, so that's going to be at 7. And then if I move my finger from point C all the way over to the y-axis, I see that it meets at the origin. So that means that my y coordinate is going to be 0, so 7, 0. Let's try D. So D, if we move our finger up to the x-axis, it meets at 5. And if I move over to the y-axis, it meets at 3. I'm going to go ahead and give you the rest of these answers, but I do want you to make sure that you're trying them on your own and you're checking with your teacher if you have any questions. So point E should be at 2 and -6. Point F should be at 0 and -5. Point G should be at -4 and -6. Point H should be at -9 and -2. Point I should be at -5 and +1. And point J should be at -3 and 8. Now, next thing we're going to do is try to graph and label each one of these points. So what I'm going to do to graph A is I'm going to find 9 on the x-axis, and then -9 on the y-axis. Oh, it would help if you could see my fingers. All right, and I'm going to figure out where those two grid lines would meet. I'm going to plot a point right there and label it as point A. For point B, I'm going to find 0 on the x-axis right here at the origin, and then I'm going to go up 6 on the y-axis, plot a point right there and label it as point B. Point C, I'm going to find -1 on my x-axis and +7 on my y-axis. Put a point and label it as point C. Point D, I'm going to find 4 on my x-axis, -2 on my y-axis, and label it as point D. E, I'm going to find -8 on my x-axis, 0 on my y-axis, and label that as point E. Point F, I'm going to find 3 on my x-axis and +4 on my y-axis. Plot a point, label it as point F. Point G is going to be -3 on my x-axis and -7 on my y-axis. Identify where the grid lines meet, put a point, and label it as point G. All right, the next section that we are going to go over is how to find distances on a coordinate plane. So certain times you'll see coordinate planes where they have different locations on them, and you need to find the distance between 2 points. So if we look here, it looks like we've got like a town labeled on this coordinate plane with a grocery store, a restaurant, a park, a police station, a hospital, Tony's house, a mall, a movie theater, a veterinarian, an elementary school, a high school, so on and so forth. So what we want to do is we want to find the distance between the following locations. If one unit or one of these little grid lines right here equals half a mile. All right, so the first one is going to be Tony's house to the mall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find Tony's house, and I'm going to find the mall, and I'm going to figure out how many grid lines are between the two. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now I need to remember that each one of these grid lines is only half a mile. So this is half a mile, 1 mile, 1.5 miles, 2 miles, 2.5 miles. So I can go ahead and label that as 2.5 miles. The next one that I want to find is the high school to the gas station. So I find the high school and I find the gas station and I count how many grid lines there are. Half a mile, 1 mile, 1.5 miles, 2 miles, 2.5 miles, 3 miles, 3.5 miles, 4 miles, 4.5 miles, 5 miles. So I'm going to go ahead and label that as that distance as 5 miles. What I want you to do is go ahead and try the rest on your own, pause the video, and then come back here as soon as you're ready to check your answers. Go ahead and do that now. All right, let's check our answers. The restaurant and the veterinarian, those should be 4 miles apart because they're 8 spaces apart. Kim's house in the grocery store. So we've got Kim's house in the grocery store. They're 3 units apart, which means that is going to be 1.5 miles apart. The mall and the movie theater are 2 units apart, which means they're going to be 1 mile. The veterinarian and the hospital are 5 units apart, which means they should be 2.5 miles apart. The library and the police station are 6 miles apart, or 6 units apart, so they should be 3 miles apart. Kim's house and the hospital, these should be 10 units apart, which means it would be 5 miles from Kim's house to the hospital. The grocery store and the park are 5 units apart, so that should be 2.5 miles apart. And the elementary school and the high school are 3 units apart, so that should be 1.5 miles apart. If you have any questions on this, ask your teacher, and as soon as you're ready, go ahead and start your homework.